the Faster Than Light radio show.
Thanks for joining us and welcome once again to the show. Well, that's 1 week without the Faster Than Light radio show. I don't know how you survived. I almost didn't. I was with a team of other very strange people, all of them radio boffins of one sort or another, and we were attempting to cover ANZAS. I trust that you got something of the flavour of what was really quite a scientific event for the state and for Australia, the 53rd ANZAS conference, looking at responsibility in science. Some wonderful material came out of that, and I hope to use some of it on the program over the next month or so. I edited down a wonderful talk on genetic engineering, which really was rather like science fiction. All that money from all that crazy science. Good stuff. More of that in future programs. For this week, I promised in the program guide a look at Dark Crystal the film. And as we're only really getting the 9 o'clock, the 6:30 listeners, because there's no morning session this week, I trust that you got the Gary Kurtz interview a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and that this follows on quite nicely and gives you my ideas of Dark Crystal, the published material, and also the film itself. Well, that follows in a little while. First of all, I thought I might have a mention about some of the wonderful things that are happening in publishing. I noticed from the Hugo ballot paper, which came my way the week before last, and also from the Nebula Award list, that some of the world's best books, some of the last year's best books, are actually on the ballots for a change. There's Foundation's Edge in there, on the Hugo ballot by Isaac Asimov, The Pride of Shenhua by C.J. Cherryh, 2010, Arthur C. Clarke, Friday by Robert Heinlein, Courtship Right by Donald Kingsbury, and The Sword of Lictor by Gene Wolfe. Now you might say, yes, I've heard some of those titles mentioned before on the show. Grant has reviewed 2010 by Arthur C. Clarke. He has talked about last year, The Pride of Shenhua. And I'm about to buy my June program, which will tell me that Grant's going to talk next week about Foundation's Edge by Isaac Asimov, recently released in hardcover. The other titles you might be interested to know, Friday by Robert Heinlein is due out in paperback in Australia in July from New English Library, and The Sword of Lictor is currently being restocked in West Australian shops in a paperback on the Arrow label. So there are all of these books, except for one, the 6 that are on the Hugo ballot, with the exception of Courtship Right, all available in one edition, most of them in paperback, but with a couple of them in hardcover, in Western Australia. I can't ever remember a year when all of the books nominated on the Hugo ballot paper were available in Australia, let alone through good booksellers in Western Australia. This must be something of a record. And certainly it brings me some pride to be able to say that you listeners of the Faster Than Light radio show could take a real interest in the world's best science fiction this particular year, because you will have had a chance to read it and therefore vote on it knowing a little about it. I sometimes wonder if the Hugo ballot is in fact an award for the book most known and most talked about rather than the one most read. This year, hopefully that'll be a little different and the book deserving of the prize gets it. For my money, having looked at a number of them, I hope it's Friday or Sword of Lictor. Both of the other two major writers, Arthur C. Clarke and Asimov, to my money haven't weighed in as they should have done. Still, that remains to be seen. That ballot, by the way, will be coming down towards the end of August, and I'll be giving you details about it. If you want to know how you can take part in the Hugo Award and vote on the year's best science fiction book, then write into the station and I'll give you the address of Constellation, the World Science Fiction Convention for this year. You need to be a member of the World Science Fiction Convention for the year, and you automatically then can become a voting member for the Hugo for the year in question. Well, there are other things happening on the newsstands. A little bit about paperbacks.
Paperback writer.
One of the good things about taking a week off is that you come back to work. Well, I was actually at 6UBS all week, so I really wasn't out here at Murdoch. You come back to work and you find that your desk is covered in material. I came back to an amazingly large pile of new paperbacks that are going out to the newsagents around the city. And there is some very good material indeed. From Methuen, a copy of The Fires of Azareth by C.J. Cherryh. For you readers of her who are quite familiar with her writing, you probably gained this in an American paperback edition over 2 years ago, but it's good to see an English edition is now available for the wider readership. Fires of Azareth is the concluding tale in the Morgaine Chronicles. I spent a program reviewing The Gate of Ivral some time back, and this particular book concludes the story in question. Here, the Azareth, pre-human on Azareth, the planet in question, the pre-human Qual, who featured in the other story that I mentioned, still reign and beyond and above human science, and their powers are unequalled in the universe. Morgaine, the closer of the world gates, comes to peaceful Azareth with her henchman, Nivain, to close the Stargate. And this normally brings about catastrophe in its path. Very interesting series of books and one well worth looking into. The Fires of Azareth, the concluding Morgaine trilogy book, which can be read in its own right, $4.95 in the newsstands now. Also out there, if a totally different read altogether, is Jean Aurel's The Clan of the Cave Bear. This was a worldwide bestseller in every country except Australia. It would appear that Coronet, when they launched the book in Australia, launched it in a cover without a picture. And as we all know, I mean, you buy the books basically for the cover. The words inside are only a secondary consideration. So when they only put words on the cover, a lot of people didn't buy it, irrespective of how good everyone said it was. Well, the book is now re-released with a drawing on the cover to let you know a little bit about what the book's about. If you're unfamiliar with the book, it's one of those door-stopper novels that the Americans seem to be going in for currently, running almost to 600 pages in length, a very long and a very well thought-out read. Jean Auel, A-U-E-L is the name of the author, is writing a tale about two groups of pre-humans, you might say. You've got the Neanderthals and you've also got the Cro-Magnons, and the two of them come together. One child, female child from one group is taken on by the other group, and she grows up with them. And so you have a look at human prehistory through the eyes of a person who's a little bit displaced and therefore can make some intelligent comment on it for the reader. But a very well-researched book, and one which gained a lot of critical acclaim when it came out. It's out there on the newsstands now for $6.95. I'd commend it to you. I plan on reviewing it in some detail when the sequel, which is about now in America, comes out here in Australia a little later on. And finally, another door-stopper read, The Elfstones of Shannonara, is available out there. Shannonara sounds like one of those rockabilly hit tunes of the 50s, doesn't it? Shannonara, na-na-na-na. Well, anyway, let's back to the book in question. The Elfstones of Shannonara is a sequel to, what on earth was the first book called? It had Shannonara in the title too. And I, for one, was one of those books that I really didn't like. The Sword of Shannara, that's what it was called. I didn't like the book, but I found myself reading the whole 600 pages. Somehow it was rather compelling reading. I kept on saying, but it isn't as good as Tolkien. It's like Tolkien. It seems to have borrowed all the best things from Tolkien, and yet it isn't as good. But somehow I read it to the end. So if you're looking for another long read in the vintage of Tolkien, and like Tolkien, a world that's filled up with, elves and humans and a strange mixture of the two, where dark and light are clearly cut and where evil is abroad in the land to be defeated by the elf-like creatures in question, then the Elfstones of Shannara is a long-awaited sequel for you, something you'd be looking out for. $8.95, a Hodder and Stoughton release, but the Futura book is the publisher. It's in the newsstands now, and again, it's a book which would be a good read for a long bus trip, or for a long weekend, or for a holiday on Rottnest like I had recently. Enough of that. I return in a little while with some words on Dark Crystal.
This is Jack Herman, convener of the Committee for SimCon 83, hoping to see as many Western Australians as can get over in Sydney June 10 to 13, 1983 for the National Convention with Harlan Ellison and Van Eycken.
Thanks for the reminder, Jack. You haven't got too many weeks. In fact, it's now only a fortnight away, less than a week away, that convention in the eastern states. No, a fortnight away, that convention in the eastern states. And by all means, get along to meet Harlan Ellison. If you're passing through Sydney, what a joke, then by all means be at the convention. Looks to be really good. If you want further details again, ring the station and I can leave your name and I can send them out to you. First of all, I thought I might mention, in talking about Dark Crystal, the published material that's sort of arisen around the film. This seems to be pretty normal these days, that one would get a movie and one attempts to what's called merchandise the movie. Well, thank God we don't have really Dark Crystal T-shirts and badges yet. It's not quite the same proportions of E.T., but there's certainly a lot of printed matter. For my money, probably the best thing about Dark Crystal is a book called The World of Dark Crystal by Brian Froud. It contains all of his drawings and his ideas and the conceptual design for the film and the film's costumes and the film's characters. It's a very sumptuous, very beautifully presented book. It's $19.95 in Australia. It's published by Michael Michael Beasley, and is available through good booksellers. I haven't seen a lot of copies around the city, but it's a book worth asking for. If you're a school librarian and you've got kids interested in this particular movie, then that's the book to get. And it's called The World of Dark Crystal. It's so good that it's been nominated on this year's Hugo ballot as one of the best non-fiction books available in the science fiction field for the year of 1982. And I certainly think it's a deserving title. Very, very nice book. That's one sort of book that arises around the film. Another book that has come out from the film is The Story of Dark Crystal Told for Children, with illustrations by an illustrator unconnected with the film at all. It's available on Macmillan. It's around about the $10 mark. And it too is a beautifully attractive book, and one that certainly tells very sketchily the tale of Dark Crystal. But probably the major merchandising effort for the film, and for any science fiction film, is the book based on the screenplay. How does the book of Dark Crystal, a novel by A.C.H. Smith, measure up to other past novelisations of science fiction or fantasy films? For my money, the book was readable, and probably that's a derogatory mark. I found that A.C.H. Smith, whom I don't know, and I haven't seen him as the author or her as the author of many other works, or any other works for that matter, I found that the way in which they told the story annoyed me. It was as though they were attempting to tell it to children for 3 pages consecutively, and then they decided that they'd had enough of telling the tale for children, so they'd tell it to adults for 1.5 pages, and the vocab would change quite markedly. Or you'd be reading along with quite a simple vocab, and occasionally, like a plum pudding, one would run across a word that one really needed to get to the dictionary to find out what it meant. Normally they were in context. The writer is good enough for that. But I got the impression he was a writer reasonably bored with the task of putting a script into a novel form, and they kept themselves amused by occasionally changing the prose. Well, that was bad enough. The story itself has some lacks, which is one of the problems of the film, and unfortunately, when the script was turned into a novel, these really couldn't be corrected. The novel is quite faithful to the film. Some of the sequences I liked best in the film are very scantily described in the book, so that they are still a revelation after you've read the book when you see the film. One particular of these is when Jen, the little character in question, who's the hero of the film, when he's walking through a swamp. The alien biology in the film was wonderful. When I went back to the book to see how well that biology was described, the book simply says Jen's trudging through a swamp quite dejected and reasonably scared. End of description. Well, it was in those words. If you get what I'm driving at, the book doesn't really describe the film in the exact detail, although what I did find interesting about the book was I got the background on some of the major characters which the film only hinted at, and which is not really developed, or is developed too fast in the film for you as the watcher to actually get hold of. The film was very good in filling me on the background details on the individual Skeksis, the evil characters in the film, and the individual Uru, as they're called, the wise mystics of the film. Well, what does the novelisation then give you? Well, I would say to near guess it gives you the flavour of Dark Crystal, the film, but it does it in a printed form rather than a visual form, which is what it should be doing. But the novel, as I said, has its flaws, and the flaws are ones of where the story is going to. The flaws are one of elaborating, really, some of the details of the plot which are lacking in the film, and these the author is unable to invent for the novelisation, and therefore the novel has the same major discrepancies as the film has. Dark Crystal, the book, a novel by A.C.H. Smith, is available for $4.95 out there in the bookstores. There are plenty of copies around the city. It is a Futura release, and I would suggest that if you're going to see the film, you may want the novel because of the coloured plates on the inside. There are 10 pages of colour plates, 8 pages of colour plates, and in a sense they're worth having for a reminder of the film, but as a real rundown and a great little read, it isn't. And that's about as much as I'd be prepared to say about it. I'll save some of my other remarks on the actual plot and its construction for a talk about the film. One of the interesting things about Dark Crystal, the film, is the music, which is unfortunately not available on record in Australia, although a record was pressed for American and European distribution. The music itself has a very Celtic flavour, and it's one of the more memorable parts of the film. Another recent film which broke very interesting ground and which the music jarred in some sense, and therefore I remembered it was Tron. And I thought, as we haven't got Dark Crystal music, why not have a listen to the Tron theme? Here's Wendy Carlos as music, the Tron theme. Theme from Tron, music by Wendy Carlos. That record is available still out there in record stores. Back to Dark Crystal. Interesting thing, Dark Crystal, and Tron reminds me of it. I said about Tron, this was a breaking, in a sense, a novel film that used animation in a really new way, and in that sense was breaking new ground, but it fell flat on the story. In Tron's case, the story was particularly thin. Dark Crystal is another groundbreaking film, this case in the form of animated material, or not animated material, but animatronic material, puppets that move and have the fluidity and the reality of individual actors, and they certainly are wonderfully conceived, beautifully designed and well executed in the film of Dark Crystal. The problem comes, though, not through a lack of story, but I believe through a whole lot of minor details which are alluded to, or in fact stated, which become so much mumbo-jumbo to actually bog down the story. Listen to John Pym as he criticises Dark Crystal out of the British Film Institute's Film Monthly. All the creatures in this Henson organisation production are singular. They move fluidly. Their eyes behave like real eyes. They speak, wheeze and grunt with conviction. Like the Muppets, they have off-screen lives. And like the Muppets, they are both self-possessed and self-sufficient. The Skeksis, half birds, half reptiles, wholly decrepit, are vividly malign. The Mystics, rather like animated steam puddings, are the personification of benign slothfulness. These foam rubber, sometimes radio-controlled creatures, comparisoned actors, are eminently watchable, and their makers are so in love with them that hardly a moment is allowed to pass before a new one is introduced. Jim Henson, who has had 25 years' experience in this field, and his team, from which in this instance Frank Oz as the brilliantly conceived Chamberlain should be singled out, have no rivals. There is, however, a deal too much mumbo-jumbo. The triumph of good over evil has become a somewhat overdressed notion. The Muppet Show is based on a classically simple premise. The individual Muppets, when seen off stage, have straightforward governing character traits. But Dark Crystal requires a voice-over explanation. The Great Conjunction, the crystal itself, life-giving forces in this context turn out to be rather fey notions. The Skeksis have an appetite for evil in the same way, deep down that the Cookie Monster has an appetite for cookies. This said, however, the Dark Crystal carries a greater fantastical jolt than Star Wars, Gary Kurtz serving as a producer in both instances. Chewbacca was a prop in the fantasy. The Chamberlain is a creature, alive to his creators, who has wandered into a rather awkwardly contrived story. Those comments by John Pym from the January issue of Monthly Film Bulletin from the British Film Institute are an adequate summation of what I would see as the core problem of Dark Crystal. It's not that the idea of dark, of evil and good coming together in some sort of confrontation, good of course winning. It is a children's movie, or a movie for adults who can think like children. It isn't that's the problem. The problem is that there are so many ideas overlaid which one never really comes to grips with in terms of the context of the story, Dark Crystal. Maybe that's the plot development for sequels or possible sequels to the film, not that they've been hinted at by Henson and his men. But the characters that are made for the film, this is where the energy, this is where the creativity was invested, not in the story, not in the plot, and this is where the reward is for the viewer. The characters that John Pym described as rather like animated steam puddings, the good guys, the mystics, the Uru as they're termed in the novelisation, they are wonderful. They're sort of like a cross between a Celtic covered, symbol covered version of a dog with a rather not bloodhound like face, but with a snout rather like an Afghan hound. Mix those with a Maori in full tattoo facial features and you have an idea of what the mystics sort of look like. And they lovingly smile. They're somehow soft and rounded and gentle. They use all the standard semantics, the ideas that one associates with good and gentleness. The Skeksis, on the other hand, are all angular and jarring. They're all tall and not low to the ground, and they've also got the same feeling of, as John Pym described, an appetite for evil. There is one gorgeous sequence in the film where the Skeksis are having a meal, and their table manners are absolutely atrocious. They're stuffing food in and out the sides of their faces, chasing the live food around the table, food's pouring out of their mouths as they're carrying on conversations, they're belching and groaning at the same time. It is absolutely disgusting, and it's wonderfully evil, and it fits the events beautifully. I love that sequence in Dark Crystal. As I said before when I was talking about the book, the sequence where Jed, the hero of the film, meets the other Gelfling, the lady of the film in question, who becomes his co-partner in healing the crystal, which is what the film is about. When he meets her, it's in a swamp situation, and he wanders through a swamp where, one after another in quick succession, maybe the sequence only takes 3 minutes, but one after another in quick succession we're introduced to a whole variety of alien animals, and they truly are alien. They are wonderful. Plants or plant animals that somehow take off from the ground. Instead of falling spores, one has rising spores. Things in the branches and things crawling on the ground. There's one beautiful sequence where an animal runs across a landscape and the landscape turns out to be an animal and eats him. It's beautiful. Also, the film is reasonably well made from an incident-to-incident point of view. The filmmaker knows his task. Gary Kurtz, as producer and as second unit director, one would expect this to be the case. The film runs together quite well. The incidents, for me, after reading the book, were well paced, and I found that the movie carried itself along quite well. The trouble is, the plot at the very beginning says, evil was introduced into the world when the crystal was broken. Here is a Gelfling called Jed. The prophecy, which is introduced early in the film, says a Gelfling will heal the crystal. Jed's the only remaining one, so we think he must heal the crystal, and the plot is obviously heading towards either him failing or completing his task. And therefore there's very little adventure to be had on the way. It's just overcoming one crisis after another to get to healing the crystal. That, the bringing together of the plot in the opening sequences of the film and really then running it on to the end, is one of the things that detracts from the movie itself. You have no way in which to build suspense in terms of the overall plot. Well, having said that, are there any other major lacks in Dark Crystal? The mumbo-jumbo that John Pym mentioned and I mentioned early on is one of the great lacks. At the very end of the movie, when we should be rising to a climax of expectation, when we should be rising in our seats to seeing Jed complete his task and feeling quite satisfied that he's done so, we have the Skeksis and the Uru merging together into the alien race that first permeated the land when the crystal was broken. This I gather from watching the film and having read the book. Not that one becomes cognizant with either from doing either independently, I might add. This alien race is presented to you as overexposed film. It's very, very light because the crystal is shedding white light now throughout the land. I found that very, very hard to watch indeed. It just looked like so much overexposed film and, in a sense, ruined the feeling of the end of the movie for me. Having said that, is it worth going to see? Well, as holiday offerings there are around about town, I would say yes. It certainly will frighten the pants off most young kids, but at the same time it does it lovingly. Some of the little sequences where surprises are at the end are the standard hide-and-seek games that one plays with any child. Also, I'd say to near guests, the evil creatures have a touch of humour about them that somehow detracts from the overall malevolence and the overall malign appearance. This is a winning feature, and one that makes it a good kids' movie. You don't allow them to pass from fear into nightmare. Somehow it stops at the original scare, and that's healthy. Dark Crystal, for my money, is a film well worth going out and seeing. It's available to you in both the Cine Centre in town, on Hay Street and Barrack Street corner, or down at Fremantle at the Port Cinema, and presumably will run in both theatres until the end of the holidays. After the holidays, I should imagine we'll see Dark Crystal round for at least a month or so more, and is well worth getting along to see. It's a movie which in its conceptual design is really where the value is for you as a viewer. It's lovely to view. One of the things I haven't mentioned are the matte paintings which are beautifully welded into the movie. The matte painters themselves, Chris Evans and Mark, what was the guy's name? Mark Garciana or something, did a wonderful job. There are some beautiful sequences of the mystics moving towards the Dark Castle for this end confrontation when we have the conflagration of the three